I've noticed a strange pattern. Whenever a woman experiences a loss in her life, she is publicly shamed for not grieving the right way. For example, Kelly Rizzo was criticized for moving on too quickly 2 years after her husband Bob Saget's death. Ariana Grande was brutally bullied online after her ex Mac Miller passed away because she apparently didn't post enough tributes and moved on too quickly to Pete Davidson, but when she did post tributes, she was accused of being attention-seeking. Meghan Markle was accused of being cold for not breaking no contact with her father after his heart attack. Hilaria Baldwin was trolled for not grieving properly after her miscarriage. Emma Hemming Willis was criticized for the way she chose to cope with her husband Bruce Willis's grave diagnosis. Most recently, Emily Kaiser has been horrifically bullied online for not grieving the way people want her to in the face of her son's death, even with a Reddit snark page with tens of thousands of active users. Or what about when Liam Payne passed away and both his current girlfriend and ex-girlfriend were being blamed for it? And this is not only reserved to celebrities either. What about this grieving mom who's trying to raise awareness about co-sleeping on TikTok after she lost her newborn from falling asleep while breastfeeding, who receives comments such as this, the implication being that she must never smile, even years later after her loss. Today I thought I would explain, first of all, why these accusations reflect a grave misunderstanding of grief. Secondly, why they can be incredibly hurtful and harmful to someone experiencing grief, and why this phenomenon, interestingly, seems to be reserved to women. I wonder. Let's start by talking about why these accusations reflect a serious misunderstanding of grief. People tend to assume that when someone is grieving, they're curled up in a ball 24/7, unable to function. And maybe for a few days or weeks, that could be the case. But human beings have a remarkable capacity for resilience, and before long, they have to put one foot before the other. And certainly many people have responsibilities. They have bills to pay, they have children to look after, they can't afford to just sit there and wallow forever. Some people might never be in that near catatonic state to begin with, because pushing through their routine distracts them from immense pain, or helps them cope, or gives them certain protective factors like a sense of community, a sense of meaning from their work. Some people bottle up their grief and they cry themselves to sleep when no one's watching, while other people cry in public. Some people grieve in private, some people want to share it with the world. All people experiencing grief go through phases because the cycle of grief is non-linear. It's not like, oh, first you're in shock and denial, then you're in depression. You go from one to the other, you regress sometimes, people go through the different phases in different orders. The cycle of grief is not like a one and done thing. You never fully master grieving. Some people are still in the denial phase of grief years later, so you would never know that they're grieving because they themselves haven't realized it. There is no normal way to grief. For the first 6 to 12 months or so, any number of responses is normal. After that time, we start to wonder if something pathological might be happening, if they still can't move on with their life, they're still incredibly impaired with their functioning, and they're still incredibly distressed about it. That doesn't mean that their grief isn't normal, it just means that they're kind of at one extreme end of typical reactions we might see. But eventually life goes on, even in the face of the most horrific tragedies. And people learn to once again smile, go to work, play, love, trust again, even though there are moments where grief hits them like a truck. So for people who think that someone must just be constantly inconsolable to be feeling grief, that is not the case. Every single one of us will experience a major loss at some point. The baseline human experience is to keep living despite it.
The fact that Emily Kaiser has just come back online, making her normal content, going on vacation, going to get matcha, going to do all of these things. Like, yes, guys, I know she's posting about going to therapy. She's posting about, the fact that she's going through grief, but like the rest, I don't know. Like, if I lost my child, I promise you, you would not see my face again online. And if you did see my face again online, there would be no way I would be able to keep it together in front of it. Maybe she's just a good actor. I don't know. But the whole thing is just so weird.
I do think that it's very strange that she came back on here and everyone's saying, oh, it's her job. She doesn't need to be on the internet for to make money. There's a million different jobs that you would or could have. People are saying, oh, well, she's in therapy. She's going to therapy. Any therapist that's decent would probably tell you not to be on the internet. That's just my opinion, and I'm allowed to have an opinion. So I can have an opinion, and I don't take it back. I said what I said. I'm allowed to have my opinion as well as you're allowed to have your opinion.
Hi, Shay. So yeah, you're allowed to have an opinion, but in this case, your opinion is incredibly incorrect. As a former therapist myself, I can tell you, therapists do not tell their clients what they should and shouldn't do. So maybe you should stick to topics that you know a little bit more about, just saying.
I have to wonder, is it that these people have never experienced a major loss in their life? Or is it that they probably have, they just somehow can't extend that empathy to another human being? Now let's talk about why such accusations that you're not grieving right are incredibly hurtful for the person experiencing grief. Grief is already an incredibly painful experience. And in my opinion, there are certain situations where it's just unacceptable to shame people because of the profound effect that doing so will have. One is if somebody's going through a major trauma, including a major loss or grief. I think you are an absolutely awful person if you shame somebody who is already going through something incredibly traumatic. It doesn't matter how terrible of a person they are. In that situation, that person is already in extreme anguish. To throw salt on the wound is just so inhumane, in my opinion. Another situation that I think is completely unacceptable is trying to shame people who are pregnant. You are not just hurting the pregnant woman, you are also hurting her unborn child. I truly can't believe that there is an active snark page for the wizard Liz at this moment, because although a lot of people disagree with things she said and done, and I certainly disagree with many of the things she said as well, although I don't think she's a terrible person, to be snarking on and shaming somebody who is pregnant and you know is having one of the most incredibly difficult pregnancies because she just found out she was cheated on by her baby daddy. What are you doing? What is wrong with you? Don't you know how that stress is going to affect that unborn child? An innocent child who did nothing in this situation? I also think being awful to someone who's postpartum is pretty terrible because you're taking advantage of someone who's already super vulnerable, who's not getting any sleep, who doesn't have any time to do the things that could help them cope with situations, who's at huge risk of depression and anxiety and psychosis right now, who probably doesn't even have time to do basic things for themselves. I genuinely cannot believe that there was an active smear campaign against Hailey Baldwin when she was just a few months postpartum.
Editing on it here, sorry for the sick voice, but I already know what people are going to say, so I just can't criticize certain people. Let me ask you this. What do you think is going to happen? What exactly do you want to happen? Are you going to feel okay if you snarked and shamed on someone and they end up taking their life? Is your right to snark on someone more important than somebody else's life, the children who depend on them? Genuinely, what is wrong with you?
I feel like I'm forgetting certain situations where I just think it's unacceptable to publicly shame someone. Let me know if you think of any in the comments. But back to the idea of shaming someone who's grieving specifically. Don't you know that one of the most quintessential states of grief is guilt? It's a pretty universal experience that when you lose someone important to you, your mind is going to start to blame you. You start to think, I should have done this, or I could have done that, or I could have prevented this tragedy if I had done that, or if I hadn't done that, they might still be here today, or I should have treated them better while they were alive, or I can't believe I did this one thing to them 20 years ago. Even in situations where that person had absolutely no blame related to the person that passed away and treated them lovely, their mind will at some point think you didn't do enough. You're somehow a terrible person because now this person's gone. So imagine how awful it is to be dunking on and blaming and shaming someone who is likely already blaming themselves and already is going fucking through it. It's one of the cruelest things you can do. And listen, in some situations, maybe this person does shoulder some of the responsibility for what happened, like that mom who fell asleep while breastfeeding her baby. In those situations where there's a seed of something they could have done differently that might have helped, getting external blame is even more painful. Believe me, if they were partly to blame for what happened, they are already living in a 24/7 prison in their mind. Their mind is executing the criminal sentence every second of every day. They don't need you to remind them that they were to blame. The only exception to this is maybe if they're literally a psychopath or possibly a narcissist. But unless you know this person personally and you have very, very strong evidence that that's the case, I would be very cautious of assuming that this person is actually a psychopath or narcissist who doesn't care about what they did. Because honestly, it's much more likely that you're projecting your own callousness onto someone you don't know. I want you to, for a moment, just consider the possibility that maybe this person is not a psychopath or a narcissist. Maybe they do actually blame themselves for what happened. Think about how your actions might be making them feel. And unless that person had the intention of causing harm, I would be very wary of casting the first stone. We all mess up from time to time. Sometimes the only thing between you and, let's say, a grieving parent is pure luck. And if you don't see that, you must think very highly of yourself. Let me give you an example. A while ago, I had some guests staying with me, and they had a toddler who was like 14 months old, I would say. Now, my husband and I weren't parents at the time, so we didn't have like baby-proof home, but we had a baby fence that we used for windows that we sort of like put around the staircase, but it wasn't like drilled in, obviously. So the toddler's mom was cooking, and I was trying to get a new phone number on the laptop. And the toddler's dad looked over and like tried to help me with something I was struggling with. And during those like 10 seconds, that toddler got through the gate and started going up the stairs. And my husband walked into the room and he was like, "Where's toddler's name?" And we were all like, "Oh shit, like who is looking after the toddler?" My husband runs to the stairs. The toddler is about to reach the top of the stairs and is about to start falling backwards. He grabs her just in the nick of time. And these parents that I'm talking about are some of the best parents I've ever met. The most attentive, attuned, healthy, authoritative parents. If you don't think that something like this could happen to you, you must think very, very highly of yourself. Everyone has a split moment where they're not as attentive as they should be, or a moment where they maybe put off certain precautions because they're so busy with other stuff. You might have this feeling of superiority against parents who have gone through horrible tragedy, but please realize that probably the only difference between you and many of them is pure luck. And lastly, let's spend a little bit of time talking about why this phenomenon seems reserved to women for some reason. Women tend to receive the brunt of blame for most things, including things that aren't their fault. When a couple is infertile, when they're assaulted, when they're in an abusive relationship, the blame usually goes on the woman. It dates back to the idea of Eve's original sin. Everything wrong with the world can be traced back to a woman's fault. Societally, it comes all too natural for us to blame women. And when there's a tragedy or loss, people go looking for an explanation or someone to blame because it helps them regain a sense of control. It helps them feel like, well, this is preventable. There's a villain in this story. Nothing like this would ever happen to me because I would never do that. I'm not a villain. Also, because of misogynistic stereotypes, any grief response a woman shows gets viewed through a critical lens. It's this idea of gendered grief policing. Women have to look heartbroken, but not too heartbroken, because then you're making it about you. You're attention seeking. They have to move on because otherwise they're just making it about them, but not too quickly because then they're It's a double bind. There's no winning strategy. Meanwhile, men experiencing grief usually receive empathy, compassion, understanding, even when they move on relatively quickly. This double standard of showing empathy to women and blaming women for everything, even when they're deep in grief, has got to stop. It's the year 2025. It's pathetic how much of a chokehold misogyny still has on us, even people who are supposedly progressive. That's all for today. I thought I would explain why blaming women for not grieving the way you want them to is insanely stupid, hurtful, and misogynistic. Take care.